cool event. I've been watching the lectures, the shows, very, very nice, and I'm sure this has been a very rich week. I'd like to thank my friends at Favag for the invite to be here this evening, in particular to Professor Van Nielsen, who honored me with this invitation. And it is a big pleasure also to be here and share this virtual stage with a person I admire, who Rodrigo Capelato, who's a friend, a reference in higher education, one of the men who really knows where education in Brazil is going, a reference not only to me, but to most administrators in higher education in Brazil. So it is a privilege for me to be here this evening. So I'd like also to greet teachers, professors, students, all the Favagi community who are here tonight. I'd like to invite now to join me on stage. I'm also playing a sort of MC. So please, Rodrigo Capelato, please join me, and the floor is going to be his. But I'd like to make a brief introduction, mention a couple of numbers, and then this will kick off our meeting. We are all here to listen to him, including myself. We are all eager to listen to what Rodrigo has to say. We're going through a moment that we all know, which is unheard of and unprecedented. And we do not really know what the future of education will look like. We have no crystal ball to tell us what's going to happen in a month, let alone in 2 years, 3 years. But there is something we can be sure of. We need to change our higher education model. Professions that exist today will not exist in the future. Most likely, professions of the future do not exist yet right now. There are estimates that say that 80% of jobs in 10 years, not 100 years, but in 10 years, 80% of those jobs in 10 years have not been invented yet. We had an opportunity last year to participate in a technical mission with SEMESP. Mr. Capelato was there, Van Nielsen was there too. We visited Singapore, the National University of Singapore, one of the best higher education institutions in the world, by far the best one in Asia. And at this university, they estimate that throughout life, students who are graduating now, throughout their life, on average, they'll have 6 different careers, not 6 jobs, but 6 different careers. So we need to train for life and be ready to change professions. You cannot simply say, I'm going to graduate in this field and this will be my track to the rest of my life. We also visited India, where we went to Infosys, which is a large software company, one of the largest in the world. And Infosys produces software for Apple, for Microsoft, and their educational director uh, received us in this large campus with several thousand students. And I asked him the following: Do you think that Indian universities are not graduating professionals with the abilities to take on positions at Infosys? And he was very pragmatic in his answer. If Indian universities were graduating, training adequate professionals, I wouldn't need to have a campus inside the company. I have invested millions here to train graduates. So what we do here is that we complement students' education. They spend 3, 4 years at university, then they come here and they have a complement to their education to provide them with the skills that we need. In other words, there is a huge gap between academia and the real world, between universities and the real world. Favagi is an example of a institution which is trying to bridge that gap. You have students doing hands-on activities. I have been at Favapi in person twice at the campus. Sadly, Today, this is not possible because of this crisis, but I'm sure I'll be back there soon. But what Favagi does now is what the best universities in the world are doing, which is to bridge the gap between university and the world, providing more autonomy to students so that they can change careers when the need arises. And an important survey that I read about machine learning conducted by UNB, this survey shows that in 6 years, by 2026, most or a good part of professions which are existing today will be replaced by AI. For example, 76% of what a lawyer does today will be replaced by AI, by machines, or 80% of what a teacher, a maths teacher does, or 49% of what a business administrator does, 80% of what a veterinarian does will be replaced. So, in a very short period of time, professions will be replaced by AI. So, the professions of the future, including civil engineering, for them, 75% of what they do today will be replaced by AI. So, if you're studying engineering today, might wonder, should I drop out? No, of course not. We need to develop skills that cannot be replaced by machines. So that will reset higher education. And this, of course, brings about the need for us to revisit and, as I said, reset higher education so that students training today at university be more compliant with real demands. This week, we had the largest higher education event in Latin America, at the FENASPI. This was organized by SEMESP, and much was talked about that. Their main topic was resetting higher education. We need to reset the model. And the moment we're going through now has a large correlation with all of that. It is about time we discuss the future of jobs, the future of education, based on evidence, based on figures, and in face of all that, I'd like to invite to join us Rodrigo Capelato for his um, keynote presentation. And he'll go deeper in some of those topics. Rodrigo, welcome to our event. It is a big pleasure to be here with you. And I give the floor over to you. I am sure we'll have a lot to learn for the next 45 minutes with you. Good evening, Gustavo. Very good to see you. Thank you for your kind words of introduction. My responsibility has gone way up now, but it was a brilliant few minutes. You left me really nice cues for me to pick up. You are a great friend that I've made. We have traveled together, we've been to events together. So, Gustavo is actually a dear friend, and I have mutual feelings for you. I have great admiration. He's a very talented professional, a great manager, an important expert on methodologies, and he is the man. He's the man. He's the one to help us reset higher education along different learning models, different curricula. Those are all issues that can no longer wait, can be put aside for tomorrow. We cannot get away from that discussion any longer. So, Gustavo, thank you for your introduction. I'd also like to thank Vanilson for the invite, another great friend that I have. We have traveled together and technical missions, other events as well. A very dear friend to all of us here in the sector. He does a brilliant job at Favagi. As Gustavo said, Favagi is an institution that we all need to look at with admiration. They are doing a brilliant job in the region where they operate. So I'm very happy to be here today to be able to talk about the new normal, the pandemic, professions, what's lying ahead. As Gustavo said, we have been talking a lot about the pandemic, remote learning, what's going to happen with that, and so on. But we cannot get around the discussion we need to have about the future, right? And taking the current moment into account. I'm talking about 5, 6 years. Uh, Reality will be that some professions will be gone or will need to be radically transformed, such as law, as it was said, engineering, and so on. So Van Nielsen has asked me to also talk about that. We conducted a survey some time ago about the professions of the future. What may come to fruition in the future? Gustavo already laid out important points. We do not know what professions will be in place then, but we need to be prepared. And that's the big challenge for education institutions. And that involves professors, teachers. We need to be ready for whatever comes our way. So I have put together a presentation in which we'll have to touch upon on the current context. We're gonna have to talk about the pandemic a little bit. We'll be talking about uh, the very topic of your International Week, which is the new normal. So we need to talk about that, and then we'll be talking about professions of the future. It is more of an exercise in futurology, if I may. Uh, that makes us all very curious, right? And it's going to be, to some extent, fun too. So I'll now share my screen with you with my presentation. Just one more second. Okay. So before I talk about the future of professions, the new normal in higher education, first we need to briefly put things in perspective. How has higher education grown in the past 20, 30 years? Higher education is made up of mostly uh, private higher education institutions such as FAVAG. 80% of the institutions are private. 75% of university students are enrolled in private institutions. So the expansion was driven from private institutions that started back in 1976. The public network of universities is composed by state and federal universities. They can be seen in the yellow line on that chart, and you can see it has grown very little throughout this timeline. So, what really drove the expansion was the private network, especially starting in 1976, when the government at the time saw that there was no way we could promote higher education through public efforts alone. Uh, there's not enough places, and places are very expensive for the state at universities managed by the state. So higher education had to expand through partnerships with the private sector. But to do that, we need some public policies in place, and those are the landmarks I have highlighted. Those public policies landmarks were very important for different moments as higher education expanded. The our LDB education lab really changed uh, education in Brazil. It's a guideline law which included several possibilities in terms of offering more places through the private network. There was a repressed demand, which was quickly met by the private sector. And then we had several other public policies put in place, especially to try and include lower income uh, members of the population. And that difficulty they have remains to date. They cannot access public universities because it's very difficult, very few places. They are not in condition to compete for a place. Even with a quota system, the number of places is very limited. Uh, but then the other option is to pay tuition, because that's the way private institutions survive. And then oftentimes they cannot afford that. So other public policies emerged to try and provide financial support, different funds, student loans, and other policies such as laws and decrees and federal acts to encourage the offering of more places at universities, and that helped the sector grow. But still, and it's important to say this because I know there are several students listening to me, even with all the expansion in higher education in Brazil, we only have 19.7% of students between 18 and 24 years old enrolled in higher education. It's a very low rate. Not even 20% of youngsters are in university. Argentina ranks at 30%, Chile, Colombia, they're all ranking higher than us here in Brazil. So it's a very low rate. Just to give you an idea, 18 to 24-year-olds account for 20 million people, but out of those 20 million, uh, fewer than 20% are going to college. You guys listen to me are already part of an elite here in Brazil for the mere fact that you've had an opportunity to go to college. With all the difficulties, all the issues, the new professions coming along, it's still a big differential factor for people in Brazil to have the chance to go to college. But we expanded, as I said, but at very low rates, as I said, and we have been growing modestly. As you can see, we grew only 2.4% in the past year, as per data from the Brazilian government. And our forecast is that 2020, because of all the pandemic, the crisis starting in March, we will backtrack. We'll see numbers going down, snapping back from previous numbers. People are facing financial problems. People are facing problems with remote classes, or they have delayed their uh, student careers in waiting for a better conditions. So that's the general overall situation of higher education in Brazil today. Here we have enrollments both for in-person courses and remote programs. Today, one of the modes, the in-person modes, has one specific dynamic, and distant learning has a different dynamic. That's why I need to look at it separately. I do not agree personally with the separation that we've done in Brazil. I am certified to provide in-person education, or I am certified to provide distant learning. There is a formal distinction, but it should have been treated as higher education, and the different modes should have been offered as alternatives that schools would have to offer to students. It could be distant learning, it could be in person, it could be a hybrid model, a mixing of those possibilities, but that's not what Brazil invented, right? Or put in place. So we have a very clear distinction between remote learning and in presence learning. And in in person learning, we see that number of students is going down, especially starting in 2015 when the economic crisis first hit, and which has been influencing those numbers since then. And in higher education, the impact was quite hard because it hit student loan systems, which was an important tool for people to access higher education. With the economic crisis, that system or that format of student loan was phased out. Last year, we only had 50,000 students going to college using the student loans system. Back in 2014, we had over 700,000 students making use of that loan system. So the number of in-person students has decreased. Uh, we see a completely different picture when you look at distant learning. In any event, there is still a distinction between the demographics between students and those two different fronts. In-person students are mostly younger students, up until 24 years of age. And if I see a drop in new entrants, it means that I am faring worse in terms of the number of students I have going to college. So that's a problem that needs to be tackled and needs to be tackled now. We have no public policies in place to address that, but it is key that we try and reverse that curve. So, in terms of new students, freshmen, we were talking about enrollments before, but in terms of freshmen, that number dropped last year. On the other hand, we see a spectacular performance, a very sharp growth in the area of distant learning. As you can see in the private network, last year we saw a growth of 19%. So it's a strong growth. But we're talking about older students. Students would have a profile which is more fitting to the model of remote learning that we offer. We're talking about asynchronous classes. In other words, it's a cheaper course because classes are there, ready, recorded. Older students already have a job or have a family. They opt for that modality, and they didn't have a chance to go to college back in their day. So I'm talking about people between 30 to 45 years old, right? People who only had a high school diploma, and now they have a chance to go to college, get a degree through remote education, which is a cheaper option. They have it's cheaper because it's provided as asynchronous programs, and classes remain available on a platform, and students attend those classes based on their availability. But that's not the case for the younger students based on surveys that we've seen. So today we have in higher education, which is growing thanks to remote learning. But on the other hand, we're not capturing young people, those between 18 and 24. And they are key for us to improve our rate so that we can have a more normal flow of students coming in and leaving 4 years later. And they need to come to college right after they leave high school. If that doesn't happen, the chance they'll never come back increases significantly. That chart shows that since 2009, the age bracket of those attending in-person courses set around 23 years of age. And even with this drop of freshmen, that number came down. They become even younger. That's the average age of new entrants. For distant education, that number was 30 years old, and it maintained 30 years old. Of course, we have younger people joining distant learning, but 70% of students are 30 years old or above. That's a very important point. Brazil only has 21.6% of people who have college degrees. That's among the population who is economically active, people who are in their phase of their lives where they could be working, they're ready to join the job market, but only 21.6% of those people have a college degree. But then the pandemic hit and it shook up the whole scenario. We had in person on the one hand and distant learning on the other hand, one more expensive than the other. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit and the in person branch of this tree had to migrate to remote learning. We had to maintain social distance, right? And then education institutions were quick to respond. I'd say that the private sector was quite agile in doing that. A survey we did in the first half showed that 99% of institutions had managed to migrate to remote learning on a different format. And why? Because they were already charging more tuition, so they could offer a different format, which are the synchronous remote learning. Several new technologies came on board, different platforms, just as we're doing right now. But classes were live, synchronous, where you can have interaction, you can split the group in different breakout rooms. Students can make presentations. You have a chat box that you students can use. You can present new material. And that brought about a new reality to higher education, a reality in which there was some resistance to change. All of a sudden, things happen overnight. And what kind of legacy will we have? We have asynchronous distant education before, a format many people cannot adapt to. It requires discipline, it requires a different profile, and then you had in person. Now you have in person that might continue to provide different formats. I can watch classes, I can interact with professors and friends, and so on and so forth. And that's when we can talk about the new normal in higher education. When we reopen, are we going to lose that? Probably not. We conducted a survey, including over 2,000 students and 416 professors, about their experience now with remote classes. And it was interesting to see that both students and professors, and I'm talking about more than 90%, they agreed that the remote model was the most fitting for the situation. So live remote classes, live synchronous classes were the right option. When asked if they would believe that once we have a vaccine, we all are going to go back to in-person classes, part of respondents want to go back to in-person teaching, but this happened in the first half of the year, the survey, just to be sure. But there is a significant portion of respondents who think remote classes could be maintained, even in full or in part. The comments that they posted, both teachers and students, they recognized that there were difficulties in terms of concentration, in the way, the format of the classes, because things were done overnight. There was no chance of better planning or of better qualification for professors in terms of understanding technologies and new tools. But despite all those problems, many have said that they do not want to lose in quality of life that they've gained with all of this. Now, there was the opportunity of not having to go to school every day, sitting on a chair at a desk, looking at a professor. If you talk about Favaki, you have students traveling 20, 30 miles to come to class, or even in Sao Paulo, where I am. There are students who work during the day. They get on the bus for a couple of hours to arrive at their university. They sit at their desks for 4 hours, passively watching class, go back home. They're tired, exhausted at the end of the day. Why not explore that gain that we've achieved with this experience and use that to change in-person teaching? Can't in-person teaching be different than it is, as Gustavo said early on? Can't it be a way for us to reset higher education? Maybe we cannot have a mixed model next year. Can't we do that? Exploring technology on the one hand, and then when students go back to school, we can have both possibilities. I'm talking about in person courses that became remote. We can maintain remote teaching, we can combine remote classes with in person classes, but when we provide in person classes, we can enrich their experience. I watched, you can watch a class on Monday in person, and then on Tuesday, I go back to school, not to watch a lecture. I can go back to school to play the leading role, to be a protagonist, to work along with the teacher doing exercises, or I'll be there to make a presentation or to work in a group, to a series of other activities other than watching a lecture, working in the lab, working in practical tasks, so the experience can be a lot richer after that. Besides that, you will start having a possibility to combine different experiences. If you are located in the countryside, you would have difficulty in doing that. If I'm not wrong, Gustavo is in Belo Horizonte. I am in São Paulo. You are in the north of Minas Gerais. And we are all together discussing higher education, and you are communicating about that. I'm making a presentation, and in a while, we're going to be discussing topics. Gustavo uh, talked about the event we had this week. It was a historic event. We brought along several experiences which were new to the event. Our idea was to minimize the losses in experience by doing things online, just as you're doing here at Favagi this week. And it's an incredible event. Watched the live transmission just now. But going back to FENASP, the event we had in Sao Paulo this week, we had several different actions to be able to exchange ideas, even during a coffee break. But there were moments when we had two people on stage, one from the United Kingdom, one from the USA, and then in person, somebody from Brazil, and then a secretary of education who was the minister of education conducting their discussion with over 1,000 people watching all of that. And then we had debates after that with questions posted by those 1,000 people in the audience and also posted by the mediator, and everybody took part. People responding in the US, the UK. So a very, very rich experience, and that can entail other changes going forward. Of course, we need to improve what we're doing this year because this was a very atypical year. We had to do things overnight with very little planning, but considering everything we are learning during the pandemic, we can improve and offer innovative models in the future. Even with all difficulties, most of students agreed that professors were able to provide attractive lessons, which is not easy. They were not trained for that. And also, professors found it very profitable, right? And that's their assessment. Uh, Excellent or good, very few responded that the experience had been bad or poor. Once again, this was conducted early on in the year. So I needed to touch upon that, what I think is going to happen in the new normal in higher education. I think what we have ahead of us is a mix of all of that. I do not see a full migration to distant learning. People might say now remote learning is way up. No, remote distant has its own life, if I may, and it's dedicated, the one we have now, right? This distant learning, it's directed to a specific niche with a very specific demand. But those students who were in person students, the younger ones specifically, now will change gears and adopt a new model, which will provide a wealth of innovation, of new experiences to higher education and for the university life for those students. Okay, now I'll move on, change gears a little bit, and talk about future of professions. And it's a bit crazy because we need to try and guess what's going to happen. But before that, I'd like to share some data. What were the courses that ranked higher in terms of the number of students searching for them in higher education for the past 4 years? But if we go further back, and that will show in the next charts, they're pretty much the same. And that is a source of concern because we see some conservatism when we look at those charts. As Gustavo said, many professions will need to be reinvented or will simply disappear. Law is a case in point, uh, where 70% will be replaced by AI. Medicine, the same, robots coming in, and so on and so forth. And how is that going to look? Uh, and I repeat, we see students being very conservative when they look for courses. Look at this chart. Since 2017, law, medicine, psychology, business, there is a conservatism around those choices, and we need to reflect about that. Are we really getting ready for the future if we continue to pursue those traditional careers? In any event, uh, just before I start going into the future professions, that chart on the screen right now is very important because during the pandemic, we've been going through a very serious crisis. We know it's difficult to continue to go to school, not only because of economic problems, but also because of uh, remote classes, classes which are not planned, and oftentimes students feel like giving up. But when you look at employability charts, it's impressive to see if you have a college degree, even under a crisis back in 2015, if you have a university diploma, your likelihood of getting a job is much higher than if you don't. And this chart, historically, those of those people who have the university diploma have a 54% chance less than becoming unemployed than those who only have high school or elementary school certificates. We're discussing the future of professions, the changes that will happen, and so on and so forth. Uh, Talking about this new world of jobs. But in Brazil, I've just said, only the elite goes to university in Brazil. That affects employability, and it also affects the salary or the wage premium that you get when you have a university diploma or a college degree. The difference in wages is also significant. That's very important to have in mind. But let's move on to the professions of the future. So the first thing that comes to mind when we talked about the most sought after courses and programs, starting in the year 2000, many of you haven't seen that, I don't think. This was something called GPS, right? We had in our cars a device where you would download a map, not very precise, but it meant a great revolution. Back then, what courses were people looking for? Again, law, business, pedagogy, accounting, journalism. A few years later, 2005, 5 years later, then we have the iPod emerging. GPS to iPod, MP3s, and so on and so forth. CDs were phased out. We were able to store hundreds of songs in a small device. And where were we in terms of higher education? We were looking for the same careers, programs, business, law, accounting, journalism, and so on. 2010, the smartphone emerges. The first models were launched in 2010. Once again, people were looking for the same careers, the same programs. We don't see IT or AI courses. We see business, law, accounting, and so on and so forth. We don't see careers linked to technology. Right? In 2015, the drone comes up, and many of our habits have changed because of that. But what about careers? Again, law, administration, civil engineering, but accounting, pedagogy, and so on and so forth. No technology courses. In 2017, the last year we had data for, but nothing has changed as you've seen. We have autonomous cars or driverless cars, and we are still looking for programs around law, business, pedagogy, and so on and so forth. We need to think outside of the box. It's time for us to reflect about this. It's not because you went to law school that you're going to be displaced out of the job market. It's not the case. But you need to reinvent yourself, even if you go to law school. And that's where I move into this survey. We conducted a very interesting uh, piece of work. Uh, Several reports started being launched talking about the professions of the future. And wild guesses all around. Where was all that coming from? So we decided to provide our own wild guess. We put together a committee to discuss professions from the future or for the future. Fabio Reis, our innovation director, was there. I was there as well. We read all those reports and tried to put together our own report talking about the professions of the future. And those are some of the reports we looked at from University of Kent, OECD, reports from the World Bank, reports coming from all over, talking about the changing nature of work and about the future of work. And we try to compile all that. So, in order to be able to talk about the professions of the future, we split that in different areas. Uh, to give us a guide, a guiding light. And we split that across those 8 areas: agriculture and veterinary, law, business, sciences, education, arts, health, and services. Pretty much what we already have. But what we saw actually was that more than getting professions right, and to Gustavo's point, we do not know exactly what is going to happen. I'll show you the professions that this committee put together or listed, but we have no idea. We cannot be sure that those professions will actually exist. We know that current professions won't be like they are today. That's the only certainty we have. But the question is, are we going to have lawyers or not? Are we going to have law as a program or not? Should I go to engineering school or not? No, those are not the questions. You need to choose a higher education career, and when you choose that, you need to investigate and acquire during that journey, acquire skills and abilities that will get you ready for whatever profession comes to be. You get you ready to face whatever comes your way if you are able to acquire those skills. That's more important than saying today, I want to be a civil engineering that can calculate how to build a bridge. That can be done by AI in the future. I won't need an engineer to do that. I'll need an engineer for other things. And what are the abilities, the skills that will be key for the professional of the future? Those are the skills you need to be looking into, because without them, you're going to be out of the job market. Number one, the ability to collect and analyze data. Uh, Everything is based on data. There is an amount, a wealth of data today which is available, which is humongous, because everything you do on the internet generates data and information. So I need to to have knowledge of how to analyze data for any area. I need to be able to collect, compile, and analyze data. That cannot be left to statistician alone. Statisticians will continue to exist to go deeper, but if I'm going to work in my area, I need to be able to collect, compile, and analyze data. Entrepreneurship, the world of jobs will change also in terms of relations. We already see labor reforms, the new Brazilian labor law completely changed, as Gustavo said just now. He mentioned a survey that says that throughout your life, you'll have 6 different careers, not 6 jobs, different, but 6 different careers. So things can change completely, and this will change labor relations. So you need to have the ability to be an entrepreneur. You'll be the entrepreneur of your own career. And oftentimes, inside the company you're working for, you need to be an entrepreneur to leverage a new project or to leverage a new area within the same company. You need to have that entrepreneur spirit, and that will be key across all areas. You know that in the future, professionals will be yourself limited, yourself Inc. I'm the company. I sell my abilities and my skills. Computing, mathematics, also, everything will be delivered through apps, through systems. Uh, One of the main skills for many areas is to know how to speak English, to be able to communicate with the world. Computing and mathematics will be the same as speaking English. There are languages I'll need be to have a good command of. Management. You need to be able to manage. Everybody across all professions will need to be a good manager. Collaborative work today, sciences, for example, moves forward on a collaborative basis. I'd say that the pandemic was not worse in terms of impacts on society because of collaboration, because collaboration is already in place. We're all sharing knowledge, we're all sharing experiences to be able to build together, to move together. I don't think we'll ever see an Einstein emerge again, one single genius. Science today moves forward collaboratively, which of course multiplies possibilities. Adaptability, everything will change and will change at a very fast pace, as it has been. So you need to be able to adapt to different situations, to different changes that will come your way. There is no space, no room for conservatism. You need to be creative, you need to be innovative. That has to be in your DNA. Flexibility as well, just as adaptability. You need to be flexible. 9 to 5 jobs will no longer be an option. Free weekends. Uh, just as you'll be working from home, you can go to the supermarket on a Tuesday afternoon, you can take a walk in the morning, but you'll need to work in different times. The deliverables will demand more flexibility. Communication, key, of course. And another key item is the business view in AI. That's a skill everybody should have because AI will be part of different processes across all areas. So I need to anticipate and have a broad view of how AI can affect my area so that I can know where I'll fit in that process or when I can bring AI on board to help processes. And this will happen, as I said, across many areas. Well, having said that, we then tried under those reports, we tried to identify professions that had a higher likelihood of existing in the future. This will be shared with Favagi. You can have access to that and also send the reports we put together. But as we are pressed for time, I'll just give you a glimpse and talk about a couple of professions. So you'll see there are very curious things. For example, tutor of curiosity. We have agricultural machinery designer, for example, uh, space miner, a series of apparently crazy things, but they can all be justified and explained. Are they going to exist? I have no idea. I have no crystal ball, but uh, that's an exercise in wild but educated guesses, right? Based on the research and survey we had contact with. So those are the conclusions, right? But I'd like to share a couple of one with you. One of the ones that I highlighted was the urban agriculture, urban farmer. So agriculture is moving to a point in technology that uh, where do you plant lettuce and vegetables to feed a city? Usually around the city, which raises cost. You have a farmer planting outside urban centers because it's expensive to plant near the city. Then they have to harvest that, load on a truck, take to a supply center, and the supply center uh, will distribute that to the grocery stores. And then we, as the end consumers, we go to the grocery store and buy vegetables at the supermarket. We get into our cars, go back home. So it's a long journey that a vegetable uh, took until they got to our table. Not to mention all the products of the chemistry that goes into that. And what can happen in the future is that with advancements, you can have harvests inside the city using squares, parks, your own backyard, your terrace, the roof of your building. So, are we all gonna become farmers? No. The urban farmer will be a profession. So, I live in a house, I have a backyard, I can lease that to an urban farmer. And so the farmers, urban farmers, will be exploring all those small areas in an intensive fashion, thus bringing down costs. You're going to be exploring free spaces inside cities, and that's the urban agriculture of the future. Another profession which is also very interesting is a defender of technological ethics. Today we have public defenders or public prosecutors who work with ethics and laws and legislations. But as technology advances, as AI and robots take up more space, several habits and customs will change to habits and mores we have never seen in life, and we do not have a ethical standard to deal with that. So we need to have somebody specializing in that. We need to create ethical patterns, and we'll have to need specialists. For example, we are now building driverless cars, autonomous cars with no drivers. I think this happened at MIT, and to try to find an ethical pattern, they pose a few questions to try and understand. For example, so I have a driverless car. So I need to standardize the cars for unpredicted situations. So if the car is driving down the street and then we have a mother with a stroller crossing the street. It's a tragic example, I know, but bear with me. I have a mother with a stroller on the one hand, on the one side, and then on the other side, you have a pregnant woman, and the car cannot brake. The car won't be able to brake. Which side will the car choose? To hit the pregnant woman or to hit the woman with the baby stroller? I need to have metrics to define What kind of ethical choice will be made? Should I go left or right? Suppose it's an old lady or whatever. Difficult ethical issues involved, but they will need to be discussed. Just the other day, I was reading about it, and you have you have robots who will look very much like human beings, and then you have those crazy pedophiles, and they might start using robots that look like children. Is that acceptable? So people will say, well, at least they're doing that to robots, not to real children. They're exercising their craziness with robots. But is that okay? Can a robot carry guns? When can a robot use their guns? So we need somebody to address all those new ethical dilemmas. Within our sector, education, you'll need to have a mentor to develop knowledge. Now, with the pandemic, this was even more clear. There are thousands of possibilities in terms of content. We have seen, of course, in Arizona State or in Tech de Monterrey in Mexico, students have different pathways for students to follow. But if I have endless possibilities, where am I going to go? Can I get the right track right from the start? So we need a mentor to help students along those tracks. So guiding students will be very important. Today, we have a curriculum in place, but when you have a completely open curriculum, you will need a mentor. Another possibility is a professional which will be interdisciplinary. They'll work to preserve national identity. They need to know about history, sociology. They'll need to know about economics. Why? Because as the world becomes more globalized, brands, customs, mores, identities, they will mix in such a way that we run a risk of having a world which is all the same. When we went to Australia, we walked into a shopping mall and it dawned on me. And I said, for a second, where am I? It was as if I were in a shopping mall in Sao Paulo. The same brands, the same type of architecture, everything was the same. If you go to Europe today, you might be inside a restaurant where people have wine in Paris and they're offering you caipirinha. Caipirinha is a Brazilian drink, but it can be found around the world. So I'll need to have somebody who's able to preserve national identities, somebody who can reinforce that and sell that idea, that image. What makes us different? Here in Brazil, we have the Amazon, this or that museum. They will need to rescue all of that. He'll be the one to preserve national identity. We might lose all of that. Everything will be the same, right? Otherwise, a personal memory curator. We know that there is a chance that people will have chips implanted in their heads. As you grow old, you might have Alzheimer's or other types of dementia. We might have implants that will help people recover their memories. But what memories will be recovered? All memories from very early on? Or are we going to have to curate that? And I'll provide them with memories. Where are we going to keep those memories? We'll need to have a curator of personal memories. So when I have an implant, uh, I need to know what needs to be there. They need to remember their mom or dad, their childhood, this or that. So that will also have ethical implications, of course. Can I simply brainwash a person and remove all traumas? Can I do that? Is it ethical? So we'll need somebody to take care of that. And moving now to my final comments, I'd like to leave you with a question. How long will that take to become a reality? Is this sci fi? Will this ever materialize? I'll just share a very curious case with you, something that happened with me. Just before we wrote that report, I attended a wedding. I was sitting at a table, and a couple was there with our table, and we are talking about professions. And I asked him, "What do you do?" And he said, "I do not know. I cannot tell you. I wouldn't know how to describe what I do. The company where I work wanted me to have a business card, but I couldn't write anything on it. I don't know what I do." So this person is a computer science graduate, but that person works at an advertising agency. This person works there at an ad agency doing the following. They follow up on digital influencers that will, at the end of the line, advertise the clients that knock on the ad agency's door. Before that, an agency would look at a product, oh, beer. We'll announce beer during a football game. This other product will be announced or advertised on the front page of an important daily paper. This other product will be advertised on an important weekly magazine. So this was before. They would advertise depending on the client, on the product, and everything. Today, everything has changed. New generations, they spend much more time with digital influencers than watching TV or reading the paper. So the choosing the right influencer is not the same as it was when you were choosing a paper or a magazine or a TV channel. It depends on a very deep knowledge of data science. What kind of public are we going to be reaching? Age bracket, financial situation. What kind of taste do people who follow that influencer have, and so on and so forth. And how can they do that? An advertising person cannot. So that person came from com- uh, data science, went to this ad agency. She had to be trained in advertising. She knew nothing about advertising, and then she became a new professional. So I told her, "You are in one of those professions which we do not know how to define. I would call them a manager of digital influencers. There you have it, a new profession. If you go to an ad school, are you ready to do that? You're not. If you do computing, are you ready for that? No. So it is a matter of mixing. If you're going to an ad school, you can work with that, of course. If you have skills in data science, programming, and so on, you will be the perfect person to work as a manager in that area. So that's an example of how professions of the future are not that far away from us. They already exist. They are among us. They're already with us. And they will be here before we can think of. That's what I had to share with you. Maybe I went a little bit over my time, but that's a very interesting topic. So I now uh, give the mic back to Gustavo if we have a couple of questions. So Gustavo, back to you. Thank you. Very good, Rodrigo. It's always very good to hear to what you have to say, your clear thoughts. You're very impressive when you speak about the topics you know so much about, the numbers of higher education, the future of professions. I have been a strong advocate that this new normal will be based on five important pillars, which you have described very well. The future will be hybrid. This difference that we have today between in person and remote learning won't be that clear cut in the future. It is key that we have a model that I call more teaching and less teaching and more learning, more hands on, more activities that can actually develop skills that are fitting to the real world. Skills based curricula, not only technical skills such as the one at InfoSales, as you mentioned. Uh, 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 Technology, which is also very important, but technology not as an ends. And lastly, I think we need to change a bit our. We need to change our assessment processes. I know there are many students listening to us. We know that making a mistake is part of the process. We cannot assess skills with a test. If you get it wrong, you fail. You get it right, you pass. That's not how things work. We need to bring models used by the production sector. Assessment is a long topic, so I won't go deeper in that topic. And I'd like to invite Rodrigo and the coordinators of FAVAG for this virtual stage for us to start a broader discussion. I know coordinators have a lot of questions to be made and posted, and I open the debate right now. I am sure this debate will be as rich and interesting as the presentation was. Okay, thank you.